Mark, welcome to the Sipping Point.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here. I've been excited about this podcast for the last few weeks.
Me too. And just when I was starting to get into wine, I was absolutely obsessed, and I still am, and love Australian wines. And so I got to take a trip in the beginning of 2000, and I got to travel around Australia for a couple of weeks, visiting the Hunter and the Barossa, McLaren, a few different places. So I'm excited here 25 years later to speak with you as an expert of Australian wine and really dig into it, because I feel like I'm sort of one of your ambassadors trying to change people's minds. They think
Thank you.
Australian wine is one thing, but we know it's maybe something else. So let's bust all those misconceptions. But before we get to that, I would really love it if you would tell us a little bit about how you even came to get into the wine business.
Yeah, it's good, mate. So I grew up in Australia. I'm a bit of a complicated one because I was born in England. My parents moved to Australia when I was a kid. So I grew up in Australia, went through hotel school in Australia. So I was surrounded by wine. My dad worked in wine sales for a bit, but as a teenager, what your dad drank, I was like, whatever, Dad, I'm not interested in that. Although we did sneak a few bottles from under the house from time to time. But wine was always like part of I was around it, but didn't get really interested in it until a little bit later. But I did a hotel management and catering diploma. So restaurant background was my whole thing. Started in kitchens, went front of the house, and then one day I just took a wine course that was over and above what I'd had at school. And it's just that the door started to open a little bit. I was tasting this Pewsey, which I thought, wow, that's made from Chardonnay. And that time, that was in the 80s, and it was like Pewsey was the hot thing in Canada at the time when I was working. That's Chardonnay? Why is it so different from this other Chardonnay here? And that sort of opened the door. And then there was one day my bartender friend and I were interested in wine, and so I started doing this course, and $5 a shift we put in, and the owner of the restaurant at this time, a very good restaurant in Toronto, let us buy wines at cost. And that was back in 85, 86. And we were getting some good wines. I remember, some good Bordeaux, things like, Chateau Paplemont. And then one month we had this bottle of 1971 Chambord Musigny from Burgundy, and everything changed for me, 100% changed. I'd never had a wine that wasn't just tasty, it made me feel something. And it was like, what? I won't use the exact language.
Wow.
But it was like, that is something different.
Yes.
And that was like, I am now really pursuing this, and sort of became a sommelier, did my sommelier studies back in the day where people didn't really even know what that word was. They thought it was a lady saying, you don't look like you're from Somalia. I said, no, it's not. Not from Africa.
Love that.
And that was it. That's when it started. And then I went full sort of pretty much started, making that my primary focus. And that's how I got into wine. And so I was working as a sommelier for the better part of almost close to 20 years, but always in restaurants, 30 plus years in restaurants.
Wow.
Started a wine school in Vancouver, British Columbia, where I lived for a long time. And then that's kind of how I got into it. But yeah, it's been a life of food and wine, to be brutally honest. It's just been always, I had a dad that cooked and was in the wine business, so I was always surrounded by it. So I came by it sort of a little bit by osmosis. But
love that. And on your Instagram bio, it says lapsed sommelier. What does that mean?
It means I was a sommelier for most of my career, but I guess I don't consider myself a sommelier anymore. I do one guest appearance at this fishing lodge up near Alaska, sort of up the coast of Canada, with some fancy chefs and stuff, but it's the only time I sort of dabble in it. But I guess once a sommelier, always a sommelier, but I'm not working on the floor. So to my mind, it's like, well, yeah, I guess I'm a sommelier. I've done the studies. I've certainly earned the title, but I'm not really working as a sommelier anymore. So
yes, since that kind of references working in a restaurant and suggesting bottles, but bring us to where we are now. You're working with Wine Australia.
Correct.
I'd love to know a little bit more about what Wine Australia does and how you fit into that.
Great. Okay. Well, Wine Australia is the statutory body, so we're technically a wing of the Australian government. Although it sort of doesn't feel like that sometimes. Well, some days it does. But we're a wing of the Australian government that is part of the statutes of the Australian government, and so we are the body that does promotion and marketing and education about Australian wine globally and also domestically. It's always been a bit more of an outward-facing organisation, but that's part of it. But also the big piece of the Wine Australia puzzle is actually research and development. And that's not quite the wing we're in. We're in the marketing and education. And I'm in charge of education for North America for Wine Australia. I was doing the job globally for a period of time. That was the carrot they dangled for me when I first got this job. But now, mercifully, I'm just doing North America. So I'm not traveling all around the world. But yeah. So yeah, that's what I do. It's kind of a unique role. I'm in charge of education, which is heavily focused on the trade, getting people engaged and doing what you just said earlier, is like getting people to think differently and ultimately buy differently, even though we're not a sales organization, but I want people thinking differently. And those misconceptions about Australia, so we're going to bust a
Yes,
few today, but I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years now, and I feel like it's that same thing that a lot of people talk about. You tell them once, you tell them again, and then you just keep telling them again and again and again, and that's how you get there. So, and I think, yeah, I mean, anyway, it's a
yeah,
wonderful role. It's been, I mean, how can I possibly have asked for a better job? I go through customs sometimes coming from home. They're like, what do you do? And I explain, like, that doesn't sound like a job. I'm like, it hasn't really felt like a job
that's
for many years.
perfect. It shouldn't
Yeah,
feel like a job. And you mentioned the misconceptions. I brought a couple of my favorite Australian wines that might surprise people, and we'll get to those
love
in a
it.
minute. But what do you feel? I have a lots in mind, but what do you feel is the top misconception about Australian wine?
Well, I think, in general, I often talk about this in my lectures that I do, is like, I think people say stupid things about wine in general, but they say a lot of stupid things about Australia, which I sometimes blame Australia in terms of how we've exported and the image we've tried to project in times, even with good intention, it probably hasn't. But I think, to my mind, it's a monochromatic view, and it's one of two things or a combination. It's either, hey, cheap and cheerful fun, which is not necessarily negative in some people's minds, but takes away from the genuine sort of, complex tapestry of Australian wine. But it's like, it's simple, cheap and cheerful, or depending on how long you've been around in the wine business, big and bold, or both. And that's about it.
Mm,
And usually revolves around red wine that's fairly considered to be, it's quite big and rich in alcohol. It's hot all the time in Australia, isn't it?
right.
Or it's that simple. And so, it's one of either of those, generally speaking. And that, I think, puts a bit of pressure on being able to sell better quality wines, because people are not looking at, like, oh, I'm not going to spend that much money on an Australian wine. And I think it's changing. I think there's a generational shift, but I would say that's it. But what do you know? I'd be curious to get your take on it, because you've been involved for such a long time. But
Yeah, I would say when I got into Australian wine, it was through the fine wines. At my wedding, I had Rockford basket press Shiraz, which is amazing.
that was when it was coming
Henschke,
to the US. It isn't
yes,
anymore.
Henschke wines. I mean, I got into some of the really, I think, top wines. And of course, there's
That's
great mid tier as well. But I would say the critter wines, as we call them, the ones with the kangaroos on them and some other animals, great party wines, great affordable prices. But I think that captured so much of the attention and commercials and people buying. And then people forgot that, you know what, there's like a whole other side to Australian wine. And it's not just Shiraz. There are
no.
Shiraz, I guess, as they say.
Shiraz.
There's many more
Yeah.
varietals and many more things being made that are so interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty spot on. I think it's interesting, because I think the yellowtail, I get this all the time. People say, "Oh, yellowtail ruined the image of Australia." I'm like, well, I think that's a fairly simplistic sort of summation of a more complex problem. I think that's like saying, Sutter Home White Zinfandel ruined the image of California. It's like, no, it didn't. It was sitting out there. There was a category over there. It's just that became what everyone was trying to emulate for a period of time in terms of exports. Let's get a slice of the yellowtail pie and let's fill the shelves with these critter brands. They seem to be working. It's like, well, all those copycats have gone away, and guess who's still there,
Mm-hmm.
still making innovative, fun wines? There's Yellowtail's still there, and so I think those wines don't take away from the better wines. That's like saying cheap and cheerful wines from any country will ruin the image. It's like, well, no, it's about how the shelves are filled and what's around them, and that's the depressing piece of the puzzle. Is that it's not really Yellowtail. It's more about people don't want to go beyond something cheap and cheerful in some markets, and certainly the supermarkets are guilty of that. But
Yeah,
you can get great Aussie wines in the quirkiest of places
amazing.
nowadays.
And, speaking of US wines, the number one brand of wine in the US is Barefoot,
Yep,
which comes out of California. And
yep,
certainly everybody knows there are amazing,
correct.
mid-tier fine wines and everything coming out of the US, Oregon, California, Washington, all over New York. And so, yeah, let's change people's minds. That's what we're here to do. So I brought a white since it's summer, and this is one of my favorite whites. Well, the Henschke Riesling is one of my favorites as
Also
well,
good,
but
yeah.
hard to find, hard to find. But the Pewsey Vale Riesling is one of my favorites. The Eden Valley is so well suited because of the cool climate. And I find that a lot of people are shocked when I tell them to drink a Riesling from Australia.
I
You
know,
sent me
but
a great picture of the valley, and I'm going to post that on our show
awesome.
page.
Yeah,
But
it's a beautiful. I love that you picked this because this was not really, and just for everyone that's listening, I didn't tell you to pick this, but I would have told
you
you to
did
pick
not.
this. But I would have because when I started back, because I got to remember I have a European wine background before I came back to Australia, actually, back to Australian wine that is. So I've got a fairly strong European wine background. So coming back to, it, I was like looking around, going, I was always had my finger in the pie with Australian wine, but when I started back doing this job, I thought, oh my God, that bloody wine needs to go on by the glass in places all around the place because the price point
Hmm.
works. And if you think about the style, it's 12% alcohol, 12.5% alcohol. It's fruity, it's lively, and it's dry. But the
Yes.
problem is people, number one, don't think it's dry. And what's the first thing people say when you want Riesling? They say,
Yes.
it's too
It's too
sweet.
sweet.
And they say it with that stupid voice as well. But it's not. And the whole reality is that Riesling is one of the great grape varieties. And you look at the success of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, for example, which is remarkable. Even though we're supposed to not like New Zealanders, Australians, I mean, that's a wonderful story. But
Hmm.
to get a confirmed Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc drinker to drink that is not a stretch. The problem is that it says Riesling on the label, and that's the barrier for people. But the style, what more do you want from a crisp, dry white wine it's full of flavor? It's got history, it's got heritage. That vineyard was first planted in 1847.
I was going to say
And
175 years. It's just
it went into
insane.
disuse, but it's been
Yeah.
since 1961. It's been planted to Riesling, and if they dabble a little with the edges, it's a Riesling vineyard. And when you post a picture, and it sits at about 550 meters. See, now I'm an American citizen now, and I promised I wouldn't make fun of the lack of metric system, but so I won't. But I've just done it. So about 1700 feet above sea level, and it's rocky and it's windy and it's cool up there, and it is a great site for Riesling. And the picture kind of shows that a little bit when you
Yes.
post it, but it's a brilliant area for Riesling and category, and it's a 20-something dollar wine.
Yes. And Louisa, it's a female winemaker. She is
Amazing.
amazing. I
Yeah,
absolutely think
yeah.
she's brilliant. And
She's a
this
gem.
is sort of, I would say, the entry level,
Correct.
like you said. But one of the things they do, and people always think it's sweet, they have this lovely guide on the back that some Riesling makers will use
Correct.
that
Yeah, yeah.
shows dry to sweet where it falls. This is bone dry. So it's at the beginning of the scale.
Yeah.
But I
Love it.
wish everybody that made Riesling would put that on the bottle, because then we could really go after that. Anytime you see a Riesling, turn it around, look for that. And that way somebody doesn't make a
Yeah.
mistake and pick out a sweet Riesling and then never go back to this amazing style,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I think is so brilliant. So that was my first pick.
I'm
And
so thrilled. It's like
yeah.
a mouthful of lime zest and so fresh, so lively. And it's, yeah, what else that's such a lovely wine. And it's funny, I don't do a lot of consumer shows, but certainly I pour at various events, and there was many times I'll have that on the table and people want to try that. Oh, I don't want to try that. I said, well, you're not getting anything else on the table until you try this. And they go, oh, fine. And then they come back 3 or 4 times saying, I want that. Give me more of that.
What other white varietals would, people tend to sort of think red when they think of Australia, of course, and
They
we'll get to a
do.
red.
We'll
But what
talk
other
about
whites?
Chardonnay for sure. Now, the irony is if you date back, I mean, there's obviously, but Australia had some award-winning wines in the 1800s, early 1900s, but a wine that put Australia on the map in terms of the press was in the 1980s. 1981, I think it was, a white wine from the Hunter Valley, Rosemount Roxburgh Chardonnay, won this big trophy in London. So it was a Chardonnay that actually made the British press. At that time, the wine press was pretty much centered, the serious wine press was centered in London with a few smatterings elsewhere in the world. Now, that's certainly not the case, but that put Australia on the map, right? It was a Chardonnay, not a Shiraz. Now, in those days, and it was mirrored in California, structural complexity and nuance was not a consideration.
Nah.
Pineapple-y fruit, oak, the bigger the better. That changed a little bit, and I think there's an evolution in that. So in terms of classic varieties, I think Chardonnay has never been in a better place in Australia than it is right now. Planted in the right areas, in the cooler zones, and the cool sites within those zones, managing that sort of ripeness, and it's better use of oak, less new oak, less time in oak,
Yes,
less
thank you.
manipulation in the winery, but just understanding that, top Chardonnay does like a certain amount of time in wood, but just managing that a little bit better. And it's never been better. There's so much good Chardonnay. So it's a classic variety. Knock yourself out and go and try a bunch of different Chardonnays from around the country. And as a contemporary variety, what I really like, and you've hit on it with the red, A lot of southern Mediterranean varieties have really taken to the fore over the last 15 to 20 years that were sort of being planted somewhere a little bit earlier, but certainly around the last 20 years or so. Not because Australians thought it should be really easy to sell some of these varieties. It's more about a changing environment and what wines, what varieties, and red and white, are going to take us into the future, hold their acidity in a better fashion, make fresher wines, make a style of wine that's more suited. And so I put Fiano in that discussion point right now, Fianos and Vermentinos. And when you're down in Australia, you haven't been for a while,
Yeah.
is that you're in McLaren Vale and you're having some of this local squid or this beautiful white fish called a King George whiting, you're probably drinking Fiano or Vermentino. And it's great. And also these vines use less water in the vineyards. So, like they're so better suited and they make lovely styles. So I'd say those two, I mean, there's a lot that I could get into, but certainly classic variety Chardonnay, without a doubt, never been in a better place. Go out and experiment with some Fianos when you see them.
Yes, absolutely. All right. I'm searching that out now. Okay. So I know you wrote a book called The Wines of Australia, which yes, you happen to have right there. And one of the things I love that you did in there, that obviously giving us the background and the history, which is so rich there, is lay out the six regions. Now, both of the wines I chose are from South Australia, which is the big gorilla of winemaking, of course, but there's so many other great ones. Tell me a little bit about the book. If people want to really dig in more about Australia wine and pick it up, I found it on Amazon. It's all over. What is the book? Why'd you write it? And what's the book going to give us?
To write it, actually, I've always been sort of involved in Texon. We always go down every year, and I've gotten to know the guy who runs Texon. He became part of the Classic Wine Library. He's one of the editors. Called me up one day, said, we've been discussing it, you should write the book on the Australia. We need an Australian book in this series. And I was like, I've never written a book. He said, yeah, but you can. I'm like, well, that remains to be seen. And it was pre-COVID, and it took a while for me to get to it. And then certainly post-COVID, I need to get down there and do it. And even though I'd been going down every year, I needed to go and do what I needed to do, not based on my job, just go down and spend 6 weeks and travel around and get sort of, so I've been going back and forth there for the last 16 years anyway. So, and then the challenge was more that the series is this is it. Anything that they put, it's 90 to 100,000 words. That's the size, right? Piedmont just came out with a book. Piedmont got the same ink space as Australia, which in the beginning, that sort of stuff annoyed me. Not because the guy that wrote the book is awesome, and I love the book. I actually picked it up because I love the ones at Piedmont.
Me too. Barolo. I'm a huge Barolo fan.
Me too. How can you not? But initially, so that made me go, I got 65 regions. The ones of New Zealand book is 12, 13, whatever they got. They have the same size. So that annoyed me at first. But then I was like, actually, this is cool. It makes it nice and compact. I like the fact that this is a book you can take with you. It's not a coffee table book. Not that I have a criticism of coffee table style books, but this is a really easy read. And so it made me sort of trim out a bunch of things and go, okay, let's get to the meat of the matter. What do you need to better understand this region, and what are the wines that are going to then support that understanding? So I kept it tight and tidy. I mean, certainly looking back, there was a couple of wineries I wish I could add it. I wish I'd approached certain subjects in a different way, but during the reprint, I'll do that. But overall, honestly, I was extremely proud of the book, even though it's a struggle to get started.
Yeah. And you said, I know you lay out the background, the history, the six regions, the varieties of grapes that are grown. But in the book also, you mentioned to me when we were chatting before the interview that you have a list, is it of 100 wines that everybody should try?
Well, it addresses the subject you and I were talking about earlier, which is this diversity. And as I'm doing the book and also in my job, I'm like, oh my gosh, people don't understand the complexity and diversity that exists in Australia. Marketing people in general, well, not us, but don't want to hear diversity. That's too complicated. They want one single, what's the USP, the unique selling props? Not going to happen. Nobody asked that about France. Nobody says, what's the one thing about French wine? I won't do it about Australia because we have 65 different regions. Never mind, the complexities of over 100 commercial, valuable commercial varieties, or more planted for sure. So as I was going along, okay, I'm going to write a list of wines that you might not be able to get them here. You might have to be in Australia for it. But if you had all of these wines, you will understand Australia, the diversity and complexity. And then there's almost tastings within it. So when I got to the end of the book and there was 100 wines, I was like, okay. It could have been 64, could have been 91, it could have been anything. So I added one to make it 101 wine, so it worked. But there's sort of tastings within tastings. Talking about Shiraz, there's 12 different Shiraz to make you understand that there is categorically no better place on the planet to experiment with that variety. Yes, I love Cote Rôtie. As a young sommelier going there, it just blew me away. But that's a style. You have all of them. Every single face that you could possibly imagine, any expression you can imagine from Shiraz, we can find it in Australia. Not anywhere else on the planet can do that whole thing. So there's that, and there's 9 different Rieslings in there. There's a bunch of Chardonnay, and then there's a bunch of different wine styles, including fortified sweet wines. And so the idea is that if you manage to get through that, there's no hope in hell you'd not understand Australia. You would understand Australia better, even just halfway through the list. But certainly if you got through that list, your life would be richer.
So just buy the book and get the list of 100. I mean, even if you don't want to read it, you just get that list if you drink your way through that list.
Most of them are here. There's a couple of sort of quirky, esoteric wines like Wendouree, which you might be able to find here, and a few others in there that haven't exported, a couple of Riesling producers. But the vast majority of the wines on there, I could do a tasting of many, like I could pull them out of the back of that book. Okay, this is on my list. So yeah, it's cool. It's fun.
Well, speaking of esoteric, I wasn't going to bring for our red Shiraz because I feel like everyone seems to know that Australia does that well. So I wanted to bring something different. And recently I discovered this producer, Unico Zelo.
So good. I was so excited. Well done.
Yes. And it's called Truffle Hound. And you're going to want to go out and get this right away, Mark, because it is a blend of Barbera. I know the wine.
It's awesome.
Barbera and Nebbiolo are grape of Barolo.
Exactly.
And I've had some other wines. They're always grape varieties that I never thought of for Australia.
Right.
And Laura and Brendan Carter just seem to be the coolest, like fun, hip face that you could put on Australian wine if you dreamt it up. It just happened. So that's what I brought to the table for the red.
Love it. And that speaks, Adelaide Hills. And I think there's some fruit from Clare Valley in that, but certainly Adelaide Hills.
Clare.
So what I love about it, it speaks to this sort of modern approach and this idea of not really a lot of winemaking artifice in there. I mean, these are probably in big, large barrels, but it's all about fruit and that accessibility and sort of lightness. And I mean, I don't know, is it the 21 or the 20 that you got there? Which one do you have? 2021?
What I love about it, though, is really have this great, like, plummy fruit, but also earthy, meaty notes, which are fabulous. This is actually a 22.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Not quite sure what's in that blend, but it's predominantly, there's sometimes some other varieties, but it's predominantly Nebbiolo and Barbera, and I love that because I love the ones at Piedmont. And and that's always one of those challenges. I mean, the problem with Nebbiolo, anywhere outside of Barolo, we have one reference point, Barolo Barbaresco. But what I do like about that wines, and I think that meaty, earthy thing that you're capturing there, but also just that it's medium weight, right? And it's capturing that juiciness and freshness that I think speaks so much more to, well, a couple of things. It speaks to how we eat and how we live in Australia with the temperatures in general. We don't want big, rich, heavy reds all the time. Maybe there's a few months of the year. It also speaks to a little bit to what's happening in the sort of generational shift and what people are wanting to drink. My eldest is pushing 30 now, which is a frightening proposition in and of itself. I had her when I was 11, but she's my little canary in the millennial wine. I'll just pick this, try that, and that's the kind of wine she'll go, absolutely, I want that. If I give her maybe a classic wine, and other wines that I love, some of those bigger, more classic sort of Barossa reds, she'll like, nah, that's old man wine, which I think is really quite rude. But her whole approach is that's the sort of stuff she wants to be drinking, that's what her friends are drinking, and it suits a lot of things. And it's, we have this term in Australia about smashable reds. That one's sort of in there.
Yes, we call them porch pounders.
Porch pounders, yeah. You put them in a glass like this, right?
Right.
Yeah,
and
and it's a really, really smart operation. Brendan and Laura are very, very close.
It's vegan friendly, which a lot of people care about. I happen to have my canary in the coal mine, but she's a Gen Z. So we can trade notes and share research. But vegan friendly, I know they're B Corp certified. A lot of the younger consumers and people our age as well really do care how the wine is made. That is made with love. It's not a big commercial, throw everything in there and pump out 1 million bottles. So I just really admire what they're doing. This also has some like licorice and herbal notes to it. And they call it the quintessential pizza wine. Okay. Yeah, 100%. I can see that too. But other things as well. Have
you had there's another one they make, which is predominantly Nero d'Avola. That's another variety from the red varieties that I think people should look at. The Sicilian variety, Nero d'Avola. But that's doing really well in Australia. It's one of the Italian varieties in Australia that I love. There's good Tempranillo, good Sangiovese, but that's one I think is just capturing that middle ground. So I spent some time in Sicily in that middle ground of
Yes.
medium bodied but fragrant, a slightly fragrant quality. Well, they do one that they co-ferment with a little bit of Zabibo or muscat, and it's called Fresh AF. I'll leave the AF to,
We
you could
know what
say,
that means.
fresh and friends,
And fruity.
fresh and fruity.
Sure.
But and you just the first time it's a bit of a room splitter in the sense that it's quite aromatic, and I love that because I love there's certain Italian varieties that have a floral aromatic like Ruche and Lacrima di Moralba. I love those wines too, but that kind of comes across a little bit like that. This other wine that they do, and it's just like, wow, this is exactly
Mm-hmm.
speaks to a different thing, and it's the kind of stuff that adore it. In fact, in my role, there's certain wine styles that open the door to certain customers to sort of rediscover and come back to Australia. And they've been very, very important wines for me. Things like, Ocoda Barrels, Fugazi, Grenache, those wines to put them in front of people and they're like, oh, I had no idea this was happening. This is great. I'm going to lean in and more. So it's important for me to show wines like that as well as and also revisiting the classics, because let's face it, Pewsey Vale is hardly what you would consider a contemporary wine in the sense that it's very classic variety, classic vineyard. However, that style of wine is 100% appropriate and contemporary now, even though it's never changed for decades.
Absolutely. So I know you're focusing a lot on the trade, and for people that are listening, like, what is the trade? It's restaurants, it's
Correct. Yeah.
retail, it's people that are working in the wine business. But if people are listening to this and they are inspired, which I know they will be, to go out and try more Australian wines, but they want to learn about the 6 states and the 65 regions that you mentioned, is there a resource online, or obviously your book, but in addition,
There
what's the
is.
best
There's actually a
place?
few right now. It's a really interesting time because 3 books came out at the same time. We haven't had a decent Aussie wine book in a while. So, but we'll get back to the books in a moment. But we have we have an education website called Australian Wine Discovered, www.australianwinediscovered.com. You might be able to access it through the Wine Australia site, but Australian Wine Discovered. You can go in there, and that was designed for the trade, but anyone can go in and access it. And the lovely thing about it is that it's free. It's a free website. You do need to sign up for it. Look at all the modules we've got some modules on there based on regions, varieties, and then topical subject matters. So that's a great resource, and there's lots of great information in there. Another book by Jane and Jonathan, a couple of American sommeliers that lived and worked in Australia. They've got How to Drink Australian. That's another book. It's a little bigger tome. And
Okay.
if you're a real geek, Andrew Kayard's A Master of Wine, has a 3-volume set on the history of Australian wine. But the point is 3 books on Australian wine within the 12-month span. It's kind of cool. There's lots of good information out there. Yeah, so it's not
That's
a bad
great.
time. It's just a question. I mean, we're inundated with information about everything from anywhere nowadays. But I'd say, those 3 books, the online resource that we've got, and maybe a couple of other authors and what have you. But yeah, there's a decent amount of info out there.
Yeah. And if you're listening and you only drink wines from France or Italy or California, just stop by the Australian section and look for these unusual suspects that we've been
I
talking
love it.
about.
Yeah, totally.
Get Mark's book, get that list of 100, make it your bucket wine list, if you will. And I think your mind is going to be blown, and you really kind of see all of the depth and exciting things that are out
Yeah.
there for any generation, boomers, Gen X, millennial, Gen Z, and all different price points, which is perfect, because not everybody wants to spend 100. Some people want 20, some people want 10, and you can find all of those things in Australian wine, up to $25-$30 if you can find. And there's a lot of great things in that range, but that's what people are looking for.
Yeah. Indeed.
Well, Mark, I have loved talking to you about the name of your book. People go search it out. You're just a wealth of knowledge, and I hope we get to talk Australian wine again. Thank you for coming on The Sipping Point.